Good day. My name is Michael Mulondo. I'm going to discuss the subject of psychological counseling for the first year degree. And the purpose of this presentation is to go through the assignment which you as a student is expected to submit. So there are 4 assignments, and I'm going to explain each of the assignment. And then as we go, I'm going to give you a number of slides and then to explain exactly what you have to do with regard to the assignments. There are 4 assignments, as I've said earlier. The first one is looking at the concept of confidentiality. Now, in psychosocial counseling, you are dealing with client, and it's very important that in your assignment you have to define what confidentiality means. And then secondly, you are going to discuss the issues that can arise with regard to confidentiality. Then you're going to discuss also about what are the benefits of confidentiality. And then, of course, what is also expected for you is you're going to discuss also what are the challenges of confidentiality. And if you don't apply the principle of confidentiality in your counseling session, what impact will that have on the client, and then also, of course, on you as a counselor. So it's very important, and we're going to discuss that in details. The second assignment, it's about AIDS risk reduction models, or ARRM. You are going to explain in your assignment what ARRM is all about, how that is applied to counseling, and also specifically when you are going to counsel people living with HIV/AIDS. So you're going to explain in detail how this model, what this model is, how you're going to apply the principle of this model, and then as you're going to discuss it, you have to give practical example, you have to explain, and then also give explanation how it works. So within your counseling session, using this model, you have to make sure that you understand. So for your assignment, you are actually expected that to say how are you going to use ARRM in your counseling session, and what possible challenges can you experience. So we're going to discuss it also in detail. Assignment 3, you are going to talk about Sigmund Freud, and Sigmund Freud is one of the fathers of psychology, and we are going to look this morning specifically at his psychosexual development theory. We're going to discuss about the theory, we're going to look at the different stages, we're going to look at some details. But you as a student is required to first explain and define what is psychosocial development. And then you are going to say, how is this theory used in the modern world, in today's world? How do they apply it? And how are you going to look at this with regard to the human rights and freedom of expression? Can people use this theory to express themselves? Can people use this theory to make sure that there is no inhibitions, there is no law, there is no one that can prosecute them? So it's very important. Now, as a counselor, when you are going to counsel a couple that's coming to you, and it's expected from you, or you decide to apply the psychosexual development theory of Sigmund Freud, how are you going to apply it? So you have to explain it. That's now for your assignment. But for my presentation, I'm just going to cover the concept of psychosocial development theory, and then come up with some of the stages which Sigmund Freud is actually giving us. But you as a student is expected to go beyond and write about your role as a counselor using the concept and the theory of psychosocial development. Then the fourth assignment, last assignment, is you're going to look at behaviors, and specifically risky behaviors that men and women are engaging, and how this risky behaviors contribute to the spread of HIV/AIDS. And then, of course, it is expected from you to look at the behavioral theory. Now, for you as a student, for your assignment, you have to look at behavioral theory and how that theory can explain why people are engaging in risky behavior. But for this presentation, I'm going to cover the behavioral theory. And then, of course, it will be expected for you to discuss it in detail and then to come up with practical example as much as possible as a student. So we are going to start now, and I'm going to start with assignment 1. And as I said earlier, is about confidentiality. So you are going to use confidentiality as a principle. And confidentiality is one of the ethical principles. And all what it says is that everyone that's being counseled is having the right to privacy. There doesn't need to be that everything that you discuss with a client means that the client takes you in confidence or has confidence in you as a counselor. And it's very important for you as a counselor to develop that rapport, to develop that skills where when you are going to discuss or take the client through this, that the client can know and do understand that whatever is being discussed will be kept private and confidentiality. Now, breach of confidentiality, it's a very, if I can say that, breach of confidentiality is a very dangerous, unethical practice. You have some of the counselors that engage themselves in this practice where they breach the confidentiality, as they call it today, doctor-patient confidentiality, by disclosing whatever is being discussed to a third party. Now, the whole principle of confidentiality is looking at two parties and no third party. So how are you as a counselor going to protect this whole rapport, this trust, that the client has in you? How are you going to make sure you're going to protect this trust, you're going to nurture it, and to make sure that you're going to ensure that there will always be this confidentiality? Because as a client has the right, the client has a right, and a basic human right to be protected. And it's very important. Now, in your assignment, when you're going to discuss confidentiality, you have to bring up this concept, you have to bring up this idea, you have to look in the light of all the ethical principles, and then synchronize those principles with the concept of confidentiality. So it's very important that you have to understand it. So I will encourage you to look at your study guide, your study manual for more information and to read up more. Now, with regard to assignment 2, assignment 2 is looking at the model. And the reason why you're going to use this model is when you're also involved in counseling people. Now, this model, which is the AIDS risk reduction model, was first introduced in the 1990s. And it became very, very popular, where most counselors started to use this model. And they use this model as a framework to look at certain behaviors of people, and to explain this behavior, and then to predict the outcome of this behavior. And then it also goes beyond the risky behaviors. It also looks at change of behavior and how individuals can apply this, especially when it comes to their relationship. And when you look at HIV/AIDS is being transferred because of behavior, risky behavior, and mostly sexual behavior. So it's very important for you as a student that you first need to explain what this model is all about. You're going to look at different aspects of the model, the different dimension, and why is it popular. Then secondly, you are going to say, how will you apply this model in a counseling session? And then number 3 is you're going to look at, has this model been used before? You're going to look at different case studies where this model has been applied in a counseling session. And number 4, which is very important, you're going to look at the Namibia. You're going to look the issues of this model also in the context of Namibia. How is it working? Does it ensure a change of behavior? Do people change their behavior when you apply this model? And so in your assignment, you have to bring out this information, which is very important, that you have to discuss this in detail as much as possible. And as you're going to discuss that model, you have to come up with practical examples, and you have to explore, you have to expand the information as much as possible. And the more practical example you give, the more it will be beneficial to the assignment itself and for you as a student. So then we're going to look further at this model. Now, the ARRM model, or the AIDS risk reduction model, is having 3 stages. Now, the first stage is recognition, the second stage is commitment, and then the third stage is action. So it is recognition, commitment, and action. So how do you recognize? For example, a patient come in, or you counsel someone, you are going to use this model. The first thing you're going to recognize, what type of behavior is this? Is it alcohol abuse? Is it multiple concurrent partnership? Then you're going to label it based on what you have recognized and identified. And then you're going to know which one of this behavior is a high risk, a mid risk, or a low risk. So it's very important that you have to go through this. Then the second stage is the commitment, where as you are going with this client, you commit yourself to the client, that you are going to assist the client to either change his behavior or either come to the conclusion to change his or her behavior, to make sure that the risk activities are low, and then you will increase the low risk activities. So this is where you as a counselor will come to that commitment, that you will strive to help the person that you're going to counsel as much as possible. Then the third stage, of course, is action. So you're only going to apply what you have identified. You're only going to apply what you have committed yourself. And it makes very important that as the client is going to apply and implement this model, that you as a counselor need to support his or her as much as possible throughout the journey. And it's very important that you have to look into this. So now we're going to look at the third assignment. Now the third assignment, it's a very interesting assignment. It's going to look at the whole issue of psychosocial development, and the whole purpose of this is you are going to use this theory to counsel a couple. Now, many times when you are a counselor and you counsel couple on sex and sexuality, you have to build your counseling on a certain theory. Now, for the sake of this assignment, we have chosen Freud's psychosexual development. Now, to understand this development, what Freud is actually saying is that your sexuality is all in your psyche, and it needs to develop throughout the different stages, and it starts from your birth up to the time you will die. So your sexuality, it never stops, it develops out throughout. And this is what he's actually explaining. And as I'm going to go through the different stages, you can use the stages, even if you are going to identify and you're going to use certain of this stage. It's very important that the couple do understand what the stages is all about. Now, Sigmund Freud is one of the fathers of psychology, and he became very popular in the early 19th century when he started from a very humble beginning, and most of his theories have become so popular. Some of his theories has been condemned, some of his theory has been challenged, but throughout time it has been proven that Sigmund Freud's theories do work, and it does make sense. So for the sake of this study and for this assignment, we're quickly going to go through the different stages for you to understand. Now, the first stage that Sigmund Freud is talking about is the oral stage. Now, the oral talks about the mouth. Now, it says from the time that you have been born or your birth up to 18 months, the first stage, what happens is you first experience sexuality or sexuality. Because what happened is you as a baby, you suck your mother's breast. So by sucking the breast in that first oral state, you have that first awareness of your sexuality, whether you are a boy or you're a girl. So, and that's what Sigmund Freud is talking about. And he was also using this complex later on when he developed his theory on the Oedipus complex. And Oedipus complex is one of the famous complex where he's looking at the mother-child relationship or baby-child relationship, and the baby-child relationship never ends. It starts with the mother, but it ends even if the man will get married to a wife or to a woman, that Oedipus complex still goes on, that he still experiences the mother-child relationship in his marriage life. And this is why this psychosocial development theory is very important when it comes to couple counseling, especially in their sexuality, that they have to understand, number one, what their sexuality is all about. So the first stage is the oral stage, where this child experiences through his mouth the first what we call sexual gratification. I mean, the child suck from the mother's breast milk as part of his or her nourishment, but that also plays a role for a baby. Very innocent, but that's part of the infancy stage of sexual identity and sexual discovery for a person. So that's from the 18 months. And then the second stage that Sigmund Freud is talking about is what they call the anal stage, which goes beyond the 18 months up to 3 years. Now, this is the time where the baby grows up. The baby knows how to goes for potty training, know how to relieve him or herself. And this is normally the time where the baby defecates, go to the toilet or go to a pot and discharge some, sit on the toilet pot or wherever. And now, as the baby or as the child is experiencing the second stage, he or she becomes aware about the sensitive part of his private part, which is his anus. And because when the baby goes to defecate, he or she defecate through the anus, and the anal or the anus stage is one of the most important stage for any human being, because you become aware, and at the moment when you have been cleaned by your mother, the gratification that you will get, that the cleanliness that you experience of that, and then it creates so much curiosity in this young child that whatever he or she eats comes out. And it's also a way where this child, through the anal stage, then also experience that he or she can cleanse herself, that within, and that cleanliness can actually make a child to discover not just the anal, but also other genitals. And the other genital stage of discovery comes through the third stage, which is called the phallic stage. And this is now after the age of 3 years, up to 7 years. And this is the time when the child is now at pre-primary school, primary school. And this is where this baby or this child discover and become to grow and develop his or her sexuality. Because during this time, the baby is beyond the anal stage, where he or she discovers her own genitals and becomes so curious and starts to touch him or herself and play with the genitals. And through that stage of discovery and curiosity, actually develop a sense of sexuality within the child. And this is mostly the time where most children start to compare and start to experiment and ask questions, very innocent question. And there's so many things that a boy and a girl goes through. And it's the most important part. And for boys, most of the time is they first experience erection, or as they start to play with their genitals, it actually becomes a form of masturbation for this child. But this is all part of the stages, according to Sigmund Freud, that a child is going through. And this is part of what they call the discovery stage, or where the child discovers he or herself. Then we go to the first stage, which is the latency stage. And this is now beyond 7, 8 years up to puberty. And this is normally where the child starts to experience wet dreams when it's a boy, where the child started to discovers some feelings of feeling in love. And this is mostly where this child starts to explore his or her sexuality with friends, for an example. And this is normally where a young girl starts to meet a young boy, and this is the stage also where they first go to school. So they go out of that confinement of security, of parental guidance, and here they find themselves in an environment where they meet other children. And especially when a boy grows up alone in a house where he never had any sisters, for the first time he meets the opposite sex, and also vice versa. So this is the time, by meeting and having the social interaction of the opposite sex, that this boy or this girl started to discover certain things about the opposite sex. And this is where they start with what they call the social cliques, and forming different cliques, talking about boys and girls. And this is one of the discovery stage of every boy and every girl, which is the age of innocence, as they say. This is the age where they actually find who they are. And then the last stage, according to Sigmund Freud, is the genital stage. And the genital stage is now going beyond the puberty, because this is the stage where the girls start to experience menstruation as a girl, which is part of her sexuality. She experiences that her breast is growing. She experiences her whole body is changing, and she's making that she's making that change within her body. And suddenly she experienced that she is being prepared as an adult. And this is normally where many young people become involved, engage themselves in sexual behavior. And this is where you discover your libido, your sexual impulses, and the opposite sex becomes more attractive. And this is the time where where they then either get married, or either go in a relationship of cohabitation, or either discover who they are and their sexuality as a man or as a woman. And it's very important to know that, according to Sigmund Freud and according to the stages that everyone is going through, every stage that a human being is going through is a stage of discovery. You are discovering something new about yourself. And when he talk about sex, he's talking about the whole holistic person. He's not just talking about the physical part, but also the emotional part the person is going through, and just by discovering him or herself and her identity. So it's very important that when you, in your assignment, you have to bring out this concept. You have to say, how are you going to use this theory in your counseling session, and how are you going to make sure that when you are going to apply that you can. Now, according to your assignment, is why you are actually experiencing using this theory is this for your counseling session, is that, remember, this couple that you are going to counsel are going through stress, and one of the stress is sexual stress, or intimacy. So how are you going explain this difference. So it might be that one of them, in a certain stage of their sexual development, they experienced a crisis, maybe a rape, maybe a neglect, maybe an abuse. Anything could have happened, which actually resulted into the stress that they're experiencing as an adult. So it's very important that when you're going to do your sermon, you're going to explain this, looking at sexual stress in a relationship and how this is applied to this. Now, in the slide, you will see two pictures. The one picture is both are black and white pictures. Is a picture, it's a drawing, it's a cartoon of a man with a beard, which actually reflects Sigmund Freud. And on the left-hand side, you will see Sigmund Freud with a cigar in his hand, very famous, one of his famous posture of photos. Now, what's interesting on the one on the left-hand side, the cartoon that's been drawn, it looks, if we look at it, it looks like a face, a man with a beard and a nose and eyes and ears. And but then when you look closer, then you will see that actually the part that's without hair, it's actually a part of a woman. Now, what does that explain? So, and this is the whole concept that Sigmund Freud based his theory, or the basis why he based his theory, is that we are all sexual human beings, whether it's a man, whether it's a woman. And we are so intertwined as men and women that we experience both the same experiences, or we have the same dynamics when it comes to our sexuality, and it's all in the mind. And this is what Sigmund Freud is going. And in your assignment, you have to bring out this concept, this dynamics, and apply it into practical examples as you take this couple through the counseling session. Now, the last part of our assignment, or assignment 4, is you are going to look at risky behaviors, and then you're going to base it on the behavioral theories. Now, for the sake of this presentation, I'm not going to go into the risky behaviors. I'm going to talk about behavioral theories and how that's very important for your assignment. The first thing about behavioral theory, it represented stimulus and response. All what it says is something stimulates you and that causes you to respond. For an example, you did not eat the whole day. When you look at the food, then suddenly you become hungry. Now the food is the stimulus and your hunger is the response. So, and in that box, there is a very good example where it actually explains the whole concept of stimulus and response. And you are the organism. You are the organism that actually needs the two components, where you are being stimulated and then you respond. So now, going into the theory of behavior, there are three components or three areas that behavioral theory is looking at. The first one is the contingency theory. The second one is the classical respondent theory, and then the fourth one is the instrument conditioning theory. Now, the constitutive theory is it's looking at the stimulus, how stimulus and responses are connected. And for an example, I've put an example when a student is writing a test, and then and use a technique that's quite new, and then the studying and started to study, and then when the students study and use the technique become a stimulus, and then by the end, when the student writes a test and he or she gets a good result, then actually the good results is the response. Then you've got the classical, which is based off Ivan Pavlov, very important and very interesting, where Ivan Pavlov was looking, for example, at the issue of conditioning and how, and he was using, for example, the example, if somebody stands in you and blows wind into you or blows into your ear, the first thing that you will do, or you will close your eyes. Or when somebody put his finger into his ear, now what happened, the hand or the finger is the stimulus, and then winking or closing the eye is then the response. And this is what Pavlov was saying. Now every time when somebody puts a hand close to your eyes, you close your eyes. Now that's, you become conditioned to that. Now he based his theory on where they were using a dog, and every time the dog came into the laboratory, he will ring a bell, and every time he ring a bell, he will then feed the dog with meat. So the dog became conditioned. So every time the dog hears the ring or the bell ringing, then there will come saliva out of the dog, and so the dog associated the ringing of the bell with the meat that he will get, which is the reward. So he became conditioned. So, and this is how life is. So, and in your theory, your assignment, you have to bring up this concept. The same with instrumental conditioning. Also, why people volunteer automatically. When somebody sees chocolate, for an example, and then you remember the last time how chocolate tasted, then there comes this saliva that you or this desire, this craving for chocolate. So this is where conditioning becomes a very important part. So in your assignment, it is expected for you to bring out the whole theory of conditioning, and then where you use behavior as a concept. So these are the 4 assignments which is expected from you to do, and I hope that this assignment helped you and also was a guidance to you. And so I will encourage you that you will make a reference to the study guide, and you also make a reference then to this study guide, to this presentation, to assist you as much as possible so that you can be able to. So thank you very much, and I wish you all the best with your assignment. Thank you.